It all started at the neighborhood barbecue, where the smoke from the grill mingled with the sound of laughter and the clinking of beer bottles. Sarah stood by the patio, juggling a plate of overcooked burgers and a lukewarm beer, when James, Mark's best friend, sidled up to her. "Hey Sarah," he said, leaning in a little too close. "Mark's been swamped at work lately. Maybe you should hang out with me to help him out, keep him from worrying." Sarah forced a smile, thinking this was just another one of James's weird jokes. "Sure, James, I'm sure Mark would love that," she replied, rolling her eyes internally. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of something far more twisted. A few days later, James invited her to lunch, claiming he needed help planning a surprise for Mark's birthday. "It'll be fun," he insisted, his smile too wide to be comforting. Reluctantly, she agreed, figuring it was harmless. But during lunch, James was all charm and flattery, his hand lingering too long on her arm. She felt a knot of unease in her stomach, but brushed it off. It's just James being James, she thought. Things took a bizarre turn when Mark himself suggested she join James on a weekend trip to clear her mind. Sarah hesitated, but Mark was unusually insistent. "It'll do you good," he said, his eyes not quite meeting hers. She finally agreed, convincing herself it was what Mark wanted. The trip started off uneventful enough, but it wasn't long before James dropped the pretense. As they sat by the campfire, he leaned in and confessed his feelings for her. "I've wanted you for so long, Sarah," he whispered, sending a chill down her spine. Shocked, she tried to shut him down, but James just smirked. "Mark knows," he said. "He's fine with it." Her mind raced. This couldn't be true, but James was so confident, so sure. She felt trapped and confused. Somehow, she managed to get through the weekend without losing her mind, but the ride home was a blur of anger and betrayal. When she got home, she tried to talk to Mark, to gauge his reaction. James was a bit strange this weekend, she ventured, watching his face closely. Mark barely looked up from his phone. "He's always like that," he said with a shrug. That's when the first seed of doubt took root. What if James was telling the truth? A few days later, Sarah received an anonymous email. The message was clear. Mark and James were involved in something shady, and she was being used. The email detailed conversations between Mark and James that she couldn't ignore. Her heart pounded as she read the damning evidence. They were planning to exploit her, but for what? Why? Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah took drastic measures. She bought a hidden camera and installed it in the living room, hoping to capture any incriminating conversations between Mark and James. Every day, she anxiously checked the footage, waiting for the proof she needed. Her life felt like a bad thriller, and she was the unwilling star. Each moment of waiting was agony, but she knew she had to keep up the charade. Mark couldn't suspect a thing. As days turned into weeks, Sarah felt her sanity slipping. The truth was out there, she was sure of it. She just needed to catch them in the act. And so, she waited, hidden camera rolling, ready to unveil the deceit that had turned her life upside down. She had no idea what she'd find, but one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah's heart raced as she clicked play on the hidden camera footage. She knew she shouldn't be surprised by anything at this point, but what she saw still made her stomach drop. Mark and James were in the living room, their voices low but clear enough to hear every damning word. "I think we should go through with the plan next week," James said, lounging on the couch like he owned the place. Mark nodded, his expression serious. "Yeah, we need to get her on board without her knowing. It's crucial." "Get me on board? Without me knowing?" What the hell were they talking about? Sarah felt a mix of anger and betrayal bubbling up inside her. This wasn't just a fling or lapse in judgment. This was a full-blown scheme, and she was the pawn. She couldn't deal with this alone. Her mind immediately went to Emma, her best friend since college and the only person she trusted completely. When Emma arrived, Sarah poured out the whole sordid story. Emma's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in anger. "That son of a bitch," she muttered. "We need to dig deeper." Emma's idea of digging deeper meant diving headfirst into James's past. They spent hours online, uncovering a trail of manipulation and deceit. James had a history of conning people, especially women. The more they found, the angrier Sarah got. "We should confront him," Emma said, her eyes blazing with determination. "Make him confess." Sarah agreed, though the idea of facing James made her skin crawl. They cornered him at his house one evening. "We know what you're up to, James," Emma said, her voice shaking with fury. "And we have proof." James just laughed, a sound that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "You're paranoid," he sneered. "You've got no idea what you're talking about." Sarah felt a flicker of doubt. Was she paranoid? But no, the footage was clear. There was a plan, and she was somehow part of it. They left James's house more confused than ever. Back home, Sarah's teenage son, Lucas, accidentally overheard a heated conversation between Mark and James about some deal. Lucas stormed into the living room. "What deal, Dad? What are you talking about?" Mark dismissed him with a wave. "It's nothing, Lucas. Just business." But Lucas wasn't buying it, and neither was Sarah. She and Emma decided to dig into Mark's financial records, something she never thought she'd do. What they found was alarming. Unexplained transactions, large sums of money moving between accounts linked to James. Blackmail? Illegal activity? The possibilities made her head spin. Emma introduced her to Mike, a private investigator with a no-nonsense attitude. "I'll find out what's going on," he promised. He began following Mark and James, documenting their secretive meetings and shady dealings. It didn't take long for Mike to uncover the truth. Mark and James were part of an underground gambling ring. High-stakes games, illegal bets, and the worst part? They were using Sarah as leverage. If Mark couldn't pay up, they'd use her in ways she didn't even want to imagine. Sarah's resolve hardened. She wasn't just going to sit back and let this happen. These bastards had turned her life upside down, and she was going to make sure they paid for it. Sarah's heart pounded as she reviewed the latest footage. This was it. This was the break she needed. But first, she had to contact Karen, the woman Mike had uncovered. If anyone could help her take down these bastards, it was someone who had already been burned by them. Reaching out to Karen was like opening Pandora's box. Karen was hesitant at first, understandably so. But after Sarah laid everything out, the hidden camera footage, the financial records, the underground gambling ring, Karen's skepticism melted into steely resolve. "They did the same thing to me," Karen admitted. "I'm in." Over coffee, Karen shared her story. It was eerily similar to Sarah's. The manipulation, the deceit, the feeling of being used and discarded. Anger simmered beneath Sarah's calm facade. They had to stop this. They had to make them pay. Sarah and Karen devised a plan to gather solid evidence. They'd pretend to go along with James's advances, setting up a sting operation. It was risky, nerve-wracking, and required more acting skills than Sarah thought she possessed. But she was driven by fury and a fierce need for justice. The sting operation was a delicate dance. There were numerous close calls, moments when Sarah thought for sure they'd be caught. But luck, or perhaps sheer desperation, was on their side. They managed to record several incriminating conversations, each more damning than the last. One evening, Sarah discovered a secret meeting between Mark, James, and other members of the gambling ring. She knew this was her chance. Sneaking into the building, heart hammering in her chest, she recorded their entire conversation. They talked openly about their operations, their plans, and their confidence that Sarah was none the wiser. If only they knew. Back home, Sarah showed the footage to Emma and Mike. It was gold. They had everything they needed to expose these men for the scum they were. But they had to be careful. These were dangerous people, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. Emma suggested involving Linda, a trusted journalist known for exposing corruption. Linda was intrigued by the story and agreed to help, diving into the evidence and preparing a thorough exposé. She ensured every detail was corroborated and legally sound, covering all their bases. As the publication date approached, the tension was unbearable. And then, just when Sarah thought things couldn't get worse, her house was broken into. It was a clear message. Back off or face the consequences. Shaken but undeterred, Sarah packed up and moved in with Emma for safety. Living with Emma was a strange mix of comforting and surreal. They joked about feeling like they were in a bad crime thriller, but the fear was real. They were up against powerful people who wouldn't hesitate to harm them. Finally, the day of the exposé arrived. Linda's piece was explosive, detailing the entire operation and implicating everyone involved. The fallout was immediate and intense. Police investigations, media frenzy, and the public outcry were more than Sarah had ever hoped for. Through it all, Sarah remained focused. She had started this journey feeling betrayed and confused, but now she was resolute. She had allies, she had a plan, and she had the truth on her side. There was no turning back now. Linda's exposé hit the internet like a bombshell. Within hours, it was all anyone could talk about. Neighbors whispered, fingers pointed, and the media camped outside our house. The police finally started poking around, their interest piqued by the detailed account of the gambling ring. The community's outrage was palpable, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of vindication and sheer terror. We'd done it. We'd lit the fuse. Now all I had to do was survive the explosion. Mark, predictably, went on the defensive. He denied everything, calling me a disgruntled, unstable wife with a wild imagination. His accusations stung, but I was beyond caring about my reputation. This was about more than personal slander, it was about justice. As for James, the snake, he vanished without a trace. Typical. Leave everyone else to clean up the mess while he slinks off into the shadows. The police investigation hit a wall without James. They needed him to piece together the full extent of the gambling ring. Sarah realized that to really bring these guys down, they needed James's testimony. And so began the next phase of this twisted saga, tracking down the elusive James. Karen and I put our heads together, pooling all the scraps of information we had. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get us on James's trail. After days of relentless searching, we found him holed up in a remote cabin, hiding like the coward he was. Confronting him was surreal. I felt like I was in a bad action movie, but there was no script to follow. We had to wing it. James, we need you to testify, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Help us, and we can help you. He laughed in our faces. You think you can threaten me? Karen and I exchanged a look. If you don't testify, we'll release everything we have on you, I said. Every dirty little secret. His smug grin faltered. We had him. Eventually, the fear of exposure got to him. He agreed to return to the city with us to negotiate his plea. As we drove back, my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. This was far from over, but it felt like a major victory. Mark, cornered and desperate, tried to flee the country. Seriously, could he be any more cliché? Emma, Mike, and I intercepted him at the airport, and seeing his face when the authorities cuffed him was immensely satisfying. It was over for him. Finally. With both Mark and James in custody, the media went into overdrive. Cameras, microphones, and flashing lights followed me everywhere. I decided to tell my story publicly, to set the record straight and warn others about the kind of schemes that had nearly destroyed my life. It was cathartic in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every woman who had been manipulated and exploited by men like Mark and James. Standing in front of the cameras, I took a deep breath. This is my story, I began, my voice strong and unwavering. And it's time the truth came out. The fallout was immense, but I was ready. I had allies, I had my resolve, and most importantly, I had the truth. Nothing could stop me now. Standing in front of the courthouse, I couldn't help but marvel at how drastically my life had changed in the past few months. One moment, I was a devoted wife and mother, blissfully unaware of the treachery around me. The next, I was a central figure in a scandal that rocked our entire community. Now, as the dust began to settle, it was time to pick up the pieces and start rebuilding my life. I poured my energy into my children and my career, determined to create a new normal. The support from our community was overwhelming. Neighbors I barely knew before now greeted me with warm smiles and words of encouragement. It was surreal to be seen as a hero, but it also came with a deep sense of responsibility. I couldn't let them, or myself, down. Emma and I decided to channel our anger and determination into something productive. We launched a support group for women who had been manipulated and exploited, aiming to empower them and prevent future incidents. Our first meeting was both heart-wrenching and inspiring. Hearing the stories of these women was a painful reminder of the work that needed to be done, but it also strengthened our resolve. Lucas, my teenage son, struggled with his father's betrayal. The boy who once idolized Mark now looked at him with a mixture of confusion and disdain. It broke my heart to see him like that, and I knew I had to help him rebuild his trust in people. Honesty and integrity became our new family creed. We had long talks about what it meant to be truthful and reliable, and slowly, I saw the old Lucas start to re-emerge. The trial against Mark and the gambling ring was grueling. Testifying in court, reliving every painful detail, was like reopening old wounds. But it was necessary. Karen and I presented our evidence with unwavering determination, ensuring the jury saw the full extent of their crimes. Watching Mark squirm under the weight of his lies was oddly satisfying. Justice was being served. James received a reduced sentence for his cooperation, but his reputation was shattered. Seeing him walk away with a lighter sentence left me with a bitter taste in my mouth. Sure, he helped bring down the operation, but the damage he caused couldn't be undone so easily. It was a strange mix of relief and lingering anger. Could I ever truly forgive him? Probably not. Amidst the chaos, an unexpected opportunity came my way. A nonprofit organization that helps victims of exploitation offered me a job. They wanted me to share my story and use my experience to help others. It was a chance to turn my pain into positive change, and I couldn't pass it up. Accepting the job felt like a step towards healing. At a public event for the nonprofit, I met David. He was charming and sincere, and he admired my courage and resilience. We started talking, and before I knew it, I was laughing and smiling in a way I hadn't in months. It was refreshing to feel a spark of hope, a glimpse of a future that could be bright and fulfilling. We began a cautious but promising relationship, taking things one step at a time. Rebuilding my life was a journey filled with challenges and mysteries, but it was also a path of growth and discovery. I was no longer the naive woman who could be easily manipulated. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. The past had scarred me, but it had also shaped me into a fighter. And I was just getting started. Sarah stared at David, her mind racing. "You were an undercover agent?" she repeated, trying to wrap her head around the revelation. It was like something out of a movie, and she was still trying to figure out if she was the hero or just a pawn in someone else's game. David nodded, his eyes serious. "I was investigating gambling rings for years. That's why I know so much about your case. I didn't want to tell you until I was sure we could trust each other." Trust. That word hung heavy in the air. After everything she'd been through, trust was a rare commodity. But as Sarah looked at David, she saw sincerity in his eyes. Maybe, just maybe, she could let herself believe in him. "All right," she said slowly. "Let's work together." David's connections were a goldmine. They uncovered more victims, each story more harrowing than the last. With each new piece of evidence, they were able to push the police to make more arrests, dismantling the gambling ring bit by bit. It felt good to be on the offensive, to take the fight to the people who had hurt her and so many others. As Sarah and David spent more time together, their relationship deepened. They were an unlikely team, but they balanced each other out. Sarah's determination and David's experience made them a formidable pair. They worked on several projects aimed at preventing exploitation and helping victims rebuild their lives. Each success brought them closer, both professionally and personally. The support group Sarah and Emma had started began to grow, attracting media attention. Donations started pouring in, allowing them to expand their operations. They were able to reach more women, providing them with the resources they needed to escape their abusers and rebuild their lives. It was exhausting work, but it was also incredibly rewarding. But just as things seemed to be stabilizing, danger reared its ugly head again. A former member of the gambling ring, out for revenge, targeted Sarah. She narrowly escaped an attempt on her life, thanks to David's quick thinking and protective instincts. The experience was terrifying, but it also solidified Sarah's resolve. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her actions. If anything, the attack only made her more determined to bring down these criminals. Sarah intensified her efforts, partnering with law enforcement and advocacy groups to combat exploitation. She became a familiar face at City Hall, pushing for stronger protections for victims and harsher penalties for exploiters. Her work led to the passage of new laws, a major victory that felt like a validation of everything she had endured. Her role as an activist and public speaker grew. She traveled to conferences, shared her story, and inspired others to stand up against exploitation. Each time she took the stage, she felt a mix of nerves and exhilaration. She was making a difference, not just for herself, but for countless others who had been silenced for too long. Life was still a roller coaster, full of unexpected turns and challenges. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was in control. She had found her purpose, and she wasn't going to let anything stand in her way. Not fear, not doubt, and certainly not the remnants of a broken gambling ring. She was a fighter, and she was just getting started. "Sarah, I need to talk to you. Please." The message from Mark, sent from prison, left me staring at my phone, my emotions a chaotic mess. What could he possibly want now? After everything he'd done, the audacity of reaching out was infuriating. But a part of me was curious, maybe even needing closure. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. Walking into that sterile visitation room felt like stepping into another lifetime. Mark looked gaunt, worn down by the weight of his actions and the reality of his confinement. He started with an apology, explaining that desperation and greed had driven him to make the choices he did. There was a hollow sincerity in his eyes that I couldn't entirely dismiss. "I've changed, Sarah," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I'm truly sorry." Forgiveness was tricky. It wasn't about condoning his actions or forgetting the pain he caused. It was about freeing myself from the anger that threatened to consume me. So, I forgave him, but I made it crystal clear. "I'll never trust you again, Mark. This is for my peace, not for you." Walking out of that prison, I felt a strange sense of relief. The chapter with Mark was finally closed. Meanwhile, James had been released on parole and started a new life under a different identity. I learned about his whereabouts through the grapevine but decided not to pursue him. Let him live with his new life. My focus was on my own healing and the positive changes I was making in the world. My work began to gain international recognition. Invitations to speak at conferences started pouring in, and I found myself addressing global audiences about exploitation and women's rights. The reach and impact of my story were beyond anything I could have imagined. It was both exhilarating and humbling. Lucas's graduation was one of the proudest moments of my life. Watching him walk across that stage, knowing he was inspired by my fight for justice, filled me with immense pride and relief. He announced he would study law, a decision that made me beam with joy. My boy was turning into a man with purpose and integrity. In the midst of all this, David and I decided to take the next step in our journey together. We married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. Our relationship was a testament to resilience and the power of second chances. I never imagined I'd find love and stability again, but there we were, building a new life together. Karen, my steadfast ally, moved to a new city to start afresh. Our bond remained unbreakable despite the distance. We continued to support each other's endeavors, knowing that our shared experiences had forged an unshakable friendship. The nonprofit organization I worked for expanded internationally, providing resources and support to women in various countries. Seeing the tangible impact of our work was incredibly rewarding. Each success story was a reminder of why we fought so hard. Life was still a roller coaster, but it was no longer derailed by deceit and betrayal. I had faced significant personal challenges and mysteries, but each one had made me stronger and more determined. My journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, the future looked promising. And I was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. Standing at the podium in a packed conference hall in Paris, I took a deep breath. The audience waited, eager to hear my story. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah, and my journey began with a betrayal that shattered my world. I never thought I'd be here, traveling with David to different countries, sharing our story and advocating for stronger protections for victims of exploitation. It was surreal, like living in a dream that I never dared to dream." David squeezed my hand under the table as I spoke, his presence a constant source of strength. Each country we visited, each stage we spoke on, was a new opportunity to make a difference. The applause at the end of my speech was always gratifying, but it was the individual stories that stayed with me. The women who approached me afterwards, tears in their eyes, thanking me for giving them hope. When my memoir was published, I was both excited and terrified. Would people understand? Would they judge me? But it quickly became a bestseller, inspiring many who saw their own struggles reflected in my words. The response was overwhelming, and it wasn't long before talk of a film adaptation began. "Can you believe it?" I said to David, holding the contract for the film adaptation. "Our lives on the big screen." He smiled. "Just make sure they cast someone really handsome for me." I worked closely with the filmmakers to ensure the story was accurate, capturing the essence of my journey. It was strange seeing actors portray such painful parts of my life, but knowing the proceeds would go to our nonprofit made it all worthwhile. The support group Emma and I started had evolved into a comprehensive network. We offered legal, psychological, and financial assistance to victims, growing far beyond what we had initially imagined. Seeing the direct impact of our work was incredibly fulfilling. Awards started rolling in, plaques, trophies, certificates. My shelves were filling up, but I remained focused on the cause rather than the accolades. Each award was a reminder of the work still to be done. At a charity event in New York, I met Lily. She was young, determined, and her story echoed mine in so many ways. She had escaped from exploitation and was struggling to rebuild her life. I saw so much of my younger self in her. "You remind me of someone I used to know," I told her with a wink. Someone who didn't take no for an answer. Lily became my mentee, and watching her grow was like witnessing a flower bloom in the harshest conditions. Her success story became a powerful symbol of our work, attracting more support and funding. One evening, David and I sat down for a serious talk. "I've been thinking," I said, "I want to expand our family. There are so many kids out there who need a loving home." David's face lit up. "I thought you'd never ask." Adopting a child was one of the most beautiful and challenging experiences of our lives. Expanding our family filled our home with laughter and chaos, a stark contrast to the silence and tension that once haunted our halls. The joy of providing a loving home to a child in need was indescribable. Through it all, I kept pushing forward, driven by a relentless desire to make a difference. Each new challenge was met with determination, each victory celebrated with humility. Life was busy, chaotic, and demanding, but it was also filled with purpose and love. And as I looked around at the life David and I had built together, I knew one thing for sure. This new beginning was just the start of something even greater. Launching the scholarship program in Lucas's name was a proud moment. It felt like the culmination of everything we'd been through, a testament to resilience and justice. As we awarded the first scholarships to young, bright-eyed students eager to pursue careers in law and advocacy, I felt an overwhelming sense of hope. These kids were the future, and they were ready to fight for justice. Our nonprofit's expansion took me around the world, collaborating with international organizations to create a global network against exploitation. Sharing resources and strategies with like-minded activists was invigorating. Together, we were stronger, more effective. It was surreal to think how far we'd come from those dark days of betrayal and manipulation. David's past as an undercover agent, once a closely guarded secret, became public knowledge. His bravery and dedication were finally recognized, leading to his appointment in a senior role within an international crime-fighting organization. Watching him step into that role was a mix of pride and anxiety. I knew he was perfect for the job, but the dangers of his work were never far from my mind. Teaming up with tech companies to develop tools for identifying and preventing online exploitation was a game changer. The digital age had opened new avenues for exploitation, and it was crucial to stay ahead of the curve. The collaboration was challenging, but the potential impact was enormous. It felt good to be part of something so cutting-edge and essential. The reunion event for the women we had helped was deeply emotional. Seeing so many faces, each with their own harrowing stories and triumphant recoveries, was overwhelming. Their gratitude and strength were the true measure of our success. It was a powerful reminder of why we did what we did. To my surprise, Mark reached out again. This time, he had served his sentence and was seeking redemption. He had started working in community service, helping other ex-convicts reintegrate into society. It was hard to believe, but he seemed genuine. I agreed to meet him, cautiously optimistic. Forgiveness was a long road, but seeing him make amends was a step in the right direction. James, too, sought forgiveness. He reached out, expressing a desire to make amends. Skeptical but willing to give him a chance, I suggested he prove his sincerity through community work. If he truly wanted to change, actions would speak louder than words. David and I continued our travels, advocating for our cause and fostering a global movement against exploitation and abuse. Each new country, each new stage, reaffirmed our commitment. We were making waves, and the world was starting to listen. The premiere of the film based on my memoir was a whirlwind. It received critical acclaim, bringing widespread attention to the issues of exploitation and the importance of justice. Watching my story unfold on the big screen was surreal. but knowing it was raising awareness made it all worthwhile. As much as I loved the work, it began to take a toll on my health. Relentless schedules and constant travel left me exhausted. I knew I needed to slow down, to delegate more responsibilities to my capable team. It was hard to step back, but it was necessary for my well-being. Lucas graduated from law school, ready to join me in the fight for justice. Seeing him step into his role with such passion and dedication filled me with pride. My legacy was secure in his capable hands. In my later years, I often reflected on my journey. From betrayal and pain to triumph and impact, it had been a wild ride. I was proud of the lives I had changed, the legacy I was leaving behind. Knowing I had turned a painful betrayal into a powerful force for good brought me peace. I had faced immense challenges and mysteries, but I had come out stronger on the other side. And for that, I was eternally